Hello and welcome back to the ninth episode of Thrive, where Wellbeing converges, your source for expert advice and insights on all things mental health and well-being. Today, we're going to be joined by a familiar face you may recognise from our previous episode on psychosocial risk. So if you haven't had a listen to that one, I definitely recommend jumping back and having a view of that one, as it was very insightful. But yeah, our guest today is Brett Webb, our National Psychosocial Risk Manager. So hi, Brett. Thank you for coming back on.
Not a problem.
Yeah, brilliant. Can you, for all the listeners who may have missed that episode, can you give us a bit of an insight into your life and your experience and your background?
Yes, so my name is Brett Webb. I'm the National Psychosocial Risk Manager, as mentioned. Essentially, I created that position as a result of the legislative change. I proposed that Converge get into the psychosocial risk as part of a service. I then designed the process, and then we started in this field. My background, I probably spent half my career in a health and safety role, and then did my master's in workplace health and well-being, and then that kind of moved me into the health and well-being and psychosocial risk space, I suppose, is how that. And on the cultural perspective, I did a lot of work previously in that space, leadership development and organisational culture work as well previously.
Yeah, brilliant. Awesome. So as you alluded to it, we're going to be talking a lot about culture today. So workplace culture and how that is defined and how that impacts you guys, all of our listeners, and how you can sort of traverse and build a better culture based on well-being and productivity and all those good things that help everyone thrive and flourish at work. So many of us talk about workplace culture, but the rhetoric doesn't necessarily align with our thoughts. So we may think we know what culture is, and we may have an idea of what it is, but it may not necessarily be true, I guess. So, Brett, what is workplace culture, and where does well-being fit within that culture?
Yeah, this is a really good question and a good topic for a nice discussion, mainly because culture is everything that we do. All the behaviour, the motivation, why we do what we do is essentially the culture of an organisation. Right? I had a session that I called "Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast," and the whole idea of that was essentially, we can create all the systems, all the processes, all the policies in the world, but it's the behavioural piece and the motivational piece, and what fundamentally the beliefs and attitude that I bring to my workforce that dictates my behaviour.
Yeah.
Right. So that, for me, is foundational of any success in an organisation. I created a model for this to try and explain culture in a way that hopefully makes sense. I'll explain it.
Yeah.
So essentially, on the outer circle is experiences. Then we come into beliefs.
Yeah.
Then we come into behavior. Then we come into results.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is experience is something that happens to me every day. Right? Yeah. These are factual events that happen to me, and I'll use the psychosocial risk. I'll use job demands, which is a hard topic, so I deliberately chose that one. So let's say I go to my leader and say, you know what, I'm really struggling with the amount of workload I've got. And the leader goes, you know what, we'll park that. We'll talk about it. We're too busy right now to discuss that. Yeah. Right? So that's my experience. Yeah. From there, I form a belief. Right? So this is something, my attitude, my motivation, something fundamental to me as a human being. And that belief might be, oh, maybe it's not important. Maybe my health's not important. Maybe my workload's not important. Yeah. Right? Maybe my opinion's not important. That then dictates my behavior, so what I do and what I say. So therefore, maybe I will work until I'm burnt out. Yeah. Right? And then I'm going to struggle from there on then. Or I do the opposite and I go, look, this organisation doesn't care about me and my opinion. I'm going to, maybe not put the effort in that I would. And I draw back. Yeah. From there, that leads to results. So if I'm burnt out, I may be off, and then you've lost me completely. Yeah. Then worse than that is I'm there and I'm not putting the input that you want. I've got presenteeism, right? Yeah. And then that's even worse. The problem I find is organisations work the opposite way. Yeah. They'll get the results and then try to work their way back, but only get so far. So, for example, if I do an engagement survey, I may sit there and say trust is not high, so therefore I'm going to try and improve trust. Yeah. I maybe get to the behavioural piece and think about, how can I shift the behaviour or increase trust through, communication or transparency, etc. But we often stop there, and we don't link that to the beliefs that I hold and then the experiences we create.
Yeah.
And even then, when we try to affect beliefs, organizations often create them as values, right? They stick them on the wall and they go, we're done here. And we don't live those values.
Yeah.
So
is it more of a good intention then, as opposed to
there is an intention.
Yeah.
I just think it's a lack of commitment or follow through to the end result. And that comes from knowing that the beliefs, let's say I put them on the wall and I do want to make them livable, it's those day-to-day experiences that are going to dictate whether someone is in line with those beliefs. Because that's why I create beliefs. I create beliefs as an organization to have a collective behavior to move forward in a given direction to create a positive culture. That's the whole idea of creating beliefs. But we tend to create them as a thing or as a document or as an idea. But it's the experiences that we create that then, whether I fundamentally are going to work or have the behavior in that given direction or believe in those beliefs or even align them with my own personal beliefs.
Yeah.
Right? Which is the key. But again, it comes back to that experience. And if I'm stopping at the behavioral piece, or I don't even get to the behavioral piece, I'm never going to make it to fundamentally aligning those beliefs and creating the experiences that do that.
So if we were to put that into sort of like a real world example, like say our belief might have been, say, like in an organisational sense, could be, we value input, and then say your manager, you go up to him and you give them some input, and they go, oh, nah, you're okay. That's not going to really, that sort of falls short of those implementation of those.
Yeah, even then, so we have a priority for engagement. Gallup kind of created a good research around 2001 on engagement being, a great predictor of business outcomes. And I think now we're starting to see that may not indeed be true.
Okay.
So in 23 years, Gallup's 2004 data has said in 23 years of measuring engagement and spending all this money on improving engagement, we've actually gone nowhere. So the results of engagement are actually level with 2001 results. So in that time, we've gone nowhere. So why? After all the money and majority of organizations out there are probably measuring engagement every single year. So one, is engagement actually the right measure of success in a business? And this is my link back to well-being. My argument would be we need to prioritize the measurement of well-being as a measure of success for a business. And research is starting to shift in that direction as well. And we are starting to see even more research out there to show that this is fundamental. One just recently got released to say that people looking for new jobs are more interested in work-life balance and well-being than they are pay and remuneration. And as we look at those stats from a generational perspective, as we get younger in that generation, that need or that desire to have well-being as the forefront actually gets higher and higher as we get younger. So if we're not ready for that movement in what is fundamental to a business, then we're potentially not measuring the right thing. Okay. Back to the input one is, if I did want to create engagement, what are the experiences that I'm creating to fundamentally shift my perception or my beliefs that you actually want my input? Is it meaningful? Is it communicated? Is it something, am I getting follow through?
Yeah.
So, right, I can ask for my opinion or my input, but that's just a small piece if I want to fundamentally shift my perception towards, am I engaged or not?
Yeah.
Right? I need to make it meaningful, and really importantly, I need to follow through. So if I say, oh, I've got this idea, and you go, great, thank you, brilliant, let's think about it, but then I don't follow through, I can still sit there and go, well, what's the point? Nothing changed. And if I follow through and go, you know what we did? We implemented this, and it was brilliant. We need to work on this. What does everyone say about what we can do in that space? What are some ideas? But if I don't get back to the people as that part of that follow through, then I lose that experience piece again to shift the culture.
Okay, so I suppose then, what could people do in an organisational sense, and even as an employee sense, and I guess to try and live and breathe those values that people actually try and implement to augment those experiences?
Yeah, so you've got to find. So another model that I created was how we think about, let's say, well-being. So let's say I've convinced you, which I may not have, that well-being is an important measure of success for individuals individually and then collectively as a business. So therefore, it creates business outcomes, right? You've got to think about, well, what is the what is the cultural shift that I need to be able to embed those beliefs in people. So first of all, I got to know what they are. So I got to measure it, right? So I got to measure certain elements, and engagement may not be the measure that we need. What about measuring those actual beliefs, fundamentally what people believe, their own versus the corporate, trust, leadership, all these different elements that are more fundamental to the cultural input. Yeah. Once I have that information, then how am I showing commitment as a business and a leadership team to making improvements in those elements? So if I wanted to reinforce values or trust or whatever that may be, or even a psychosocial risk, job demands is the example I gave, but there's plenty more in role clarity and reward and recognition and change and organizational justice, etc., etc. How am I creating that as a measurable priority equivalent to some of the other business priorities, whether that's financial, patient outcomes, student outcomes, depending on the industry, right? Operational outcomes, manufacturing outcomes. How am I showing that well-being is a priority equivalent to that? And then how am I doing it to the extent that I'm fundamentally shifting the perception of my people that is important? Yeah. Right? And I'm not saying it should be more important than, production outcomes. I am, but at least equivalently important. Yeah. To that.
Could you say though, because it underpins, you could probably make a case, I guess, that well-being underpins everything that we do. So if you're feeling good in your position, you feel heard, you feel safe, you feel comfortable, you feel that people care, and then you have that productivity and that drive to keep going, that then would then support the productivity the operational outcomes.
Yeah. Or financial outcomes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. So I can set financial goals, but it's the people that make those financial goals, or the people that make the relationships that get those financial goals. Yeah. Right? So if I have, you're right, happier people and greater well-being in my people, then I can expect, and that I've shown that the organization cares about those outcomes, and especially my leadership cares about those outcomes, I am more likely to get those productivity outcomes and therefore the financial benefit of the business. And that's culture in a nutshell. Yeah. Right? Is being able to shift those in a more positive direction.
Yeah, definitely. Brilliant. So I suppose you've already alluded to it. You talked a little bit about it. Psychosocial risk is obviously your area of expertise here at Converge. So, and I know in the previous episodes, definitely go back and have a listen and have a watch if you haven't. We've talked a little bit about what psychosocial risk is. But what does this mean, and how does it sort of impact that workplace culture? I know you've sort of spoken to it, but how does it physically impact?
Well, you think about it. So currently we recognise 14 psychosocial risks. So I just mentioned a few, but if we think about change and justice and recognition, reward, and relationships, and even violence and harassment and sexual harassment, that they are, and it's a lot, fundamental to who we are. Yeah. Right? And there's two important parts of this as well in the design of this, I suppose, is that there's risk factors and then there's protective factors. Yep. So there's risk factors essentially taking away, right? Yeah. Sending us, if we think about it as a continuum, sending us in the unhealthy spectrum as an individual, as a team, or as an organization, right? So if I have high job demands, you're going to take me in a negative direction. If I have poor relationships, I'm going to go in a negative. If I not open and transparent in my communication, I'm going to have poor change management or poor organizational justice. The other side of it is creating protective factors. Yeah. If I have good relationships, I'm more likely to thrive. If I have great support, I'm more likely to thrive. If I have autonomy or job control, again, I'm more likely. So, as an organization, it's important to know where you sit in that, let's say, that continuum. So if I'm in the unhealthy, then my actions are to get out of unhealthy. So what are the damaging behaviors and policies and procedures or training or whatever that may be that is sending us into the red, let's say, and then so I can get into a healthy stage. And then once I'm there, what are the strategies I can put in place to affect culture to send me into a thriving direction, both individually and organizationally? But knowing where you sit and thinking about it from a maturity perspective becomes very important. I can't go from unhealthy in red as a culture and go all the way to green.
Okay.
Right? There's no table tennis tables or foosball or resilience training that is ever going to make that leap. So having self-awareness as an organization or even as a leader will tell me where I currently sit.
Yeah.
And then I think from a maturity perspective, what is the logical next step in shifting this culture as well as some of the specific psychosocial risks in a more positive direction.
Yeah.
And that's how we collectively potentially move forward that's when our values, our corporate values that we may have on the wall become more meaningful.
Yeah, got you. So is it incremental then? So it could be like, if you put this into an analogy, I suppose. So, you've got someone, you might be being harassed at work, say. So you're in the red, obviously, at that point.
Yep.
Then someone might say, okay, well, we need to put some training in place to make sure that, that we can sort of quell harassment.
Yep.
And then it would be a conversation with the person. So is it incremental steps to get you into that thriving space where obviously you're able to, come to work, feel safe and comfortable and not be in those situations?
Yeah, so with that example, I mean, there's two forms of example. The harmful behavior one is one, and then there's more the systemic, your change management, your organizational justice. No, and it's not. And with that example, you'd need to obviously stop the behavior that's creating the bullying, the violence, whatever that may be. It's take it out of the red, and then you need to build the culture and the relationships to even get it into healthy. Which is going to take a while because the severity of that is going to be quite impactful, and the trust, and trust is a hard one. So while we think about trust as we can contribute to trust and being an open and transparent, they're not equivalent. If I take it away, it's far more significant in taking away, right? So it does become difficult. But you're right. I have to rebuild that. I have to stop the behavior that sends us there in the first place. Then I need to rebuild the relationships and the culture. Let's say we're even within that team or even in that relationship. And sometimes it can be severed, if the trust is completely gone. Yeah. And then from the other perspective, from a more systemic perspective, it's the same. If I manage change poorly, and I engage my workforce and I go, oh well, let's do this, this, and this, and I go, oh great, but don't do anything with that action. Then I have a form of learned helplessness potentially, where I sit there and go, well, what's the point? What's the point contributing to this if nothing changes or I'm not being heard? So I need to move that out of the red, right, to become to a healthy spot. So then I can go, okay, when I do transparency and communicate well and involve then I create meaningful engagement, and then I follow through on that engagement, and then I maybe have measurables as part of that change management engagement piece to hold that behavior accountable. Then I'm potentially moving into the thriving space.
Got you. So is all of that then underpinned with a cultural sort of lens?
Yeah, all of that is dictated by culture.
Got you. So it would be that like the organisation themselves have to sort of put themselves on that pedestal and build out that culture to be able to
everything that we do
impactful change.
Everything we do should have a cultural lens to it. I.e., what is the behaviour that we have? What is the desired behaviour? And what am I fundamentally doing to create the desired behaviour? Right. So a policy, for example, seldom does that. Right. It is mainly there to create guidance, or even from a legal perspective. And even training, if I throw a half-day training at something, it is seldom going to create the desired behavior. Right? How I reinforce that behavior, how I hold people accountable to that behavior, but even how I coach and mentor in that behavior, how to then that practical implement all those daily experiences that then it creates those beliefs is how I'm going to get the desired behavior.
Got you. So it's also as well, I suppose, if you look at it from sort of a mandatory lens, I guess. So obviously a lot of the states currently have psychosocial risk legislation. And obviously Victoria are about to, introduce their own in December. How would that then impact culture? Do you see it being beneficial, or is there any sort of loose ends or issues that you can see?
Yeah, I think it's beneficial from a societal perspective. It's beneficial because it's at least going to create an initial behaviour, right? So the legislation across the country is essentially risk-based. It's very simple in how it's written and its design. The implementation of the risk assessment can be quite difficult given the 14, but in how it's written is just a prompt to create a psychosocial specific risk assessment, which is great. And I think we'll see a societal shift in a positive direction. that has nothing to do with the culture,
Okay.
right? I can create the risk assessments to the Calcome homes, but essentially at the end of the day, it's just a document,
Yeah.
right? Even then, in my control measures, I need to be thinking, how does this impact on culture, even in the individual control measures that I create?
Yeah.
Right? So the training, how is this going to shift behavior? How can I go from simply knowledge transfer to knowledge embedment, right? And what does knowledge embedment look like if I was to fundamentally do training well? So if, let's say I did a knowledge transfer as part of a workshop or an e-learning, okay, how am I following this up? How am I setting the leader up for success so they can implement that desired behavior?
Yeah.
Right? So it's good in that we'll see a societal shift and an organizational shift, but organizations need to do it for an ethical and hopefully business reason, which is kind of what I was saying earlier.
Yeah.
So they're motivated for those components, and you're more likely to see that cultural shift if I'm motivated to do it from an ethical and business reason than if I'm purely motivated to do it from a legal perspective or legislative.
Surely there's also like an emotive angle as well. So like, supporting your employees is just the right thing to do.
Yeah, but it's a hard one.
Yeah.
So I talked about it in priority, right?
Yeah.
So, is your organization prioritizing, let's use support, the support of their people where, equivalent to financial outcomes? And how are you doing that? Right? So you think about like perception. So let's say we took support as the example, and I measured it, and it said it was not great.
Yeah.
Right? So that's people's perceptions. That's the reality. I need to create a priority in my organization with the actions that create a desired behavior so well that I shift that perception.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. So let's say you're a leader of an organization, and I said, do you care about your employees? You would say yes, and you would fundamentally believe it.
Yeah.
If I went and asked your employees, does your leader care about you?
They may have a different perception.
I may get a different result. Yeah. And that's the key to this, is you need to create the experience, the everyday experiences where those people fundamentally believe that you care about them.
Yeah.
So support is a great example. So if I'm a leader and I wanted to shift that perception in support, let's say I wanted to increase it by 20%, it's the everyday experiences that I create as that leader that's going to fundamentally shift your belief system.
Yeah.
And where you shift your perception to go, yeah, I do think he cares about me because of these experiences that I've had on a daily basis.
Yeah. So is this the crucial role that leaders play then in creating positive culture and wellbeing outcomes?
Yeah, so let's say I do a risk assessment, I write hundreds of recommendations or control measures. I often meet with the client and they say, okay, well, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And, if we had to concentrate on one thing to get better outcomes, what would we do? And I always say leadership every time. Leadership will make and break a culture.
Okay. Why is that?
Because they are the ones that create it, reinforce it, drive it, impact on behavior. Right? So if I have values, the daily experiences they create is essentially somewhat driven by that leadership.
Yeah.
Even if they create a less autocratic environment or an element of higher empowerment, essentially they have to be involved in actively creating that environment. So they need to pull back, they need to create opportunities, they need to not micromanage to be able to create that environment where someone sits there and goes, I have higher job control, or I see the perception because of these actions that are taken.
Yeah.
So for me, leadership is the key.
Does that help build trust then as well?
Yeah, I mean, if trust is your outcome that you're looking for, and it's measurable, then I'd hope that you create behaviors or actions, let's say, or strategies that increases trust. So, and that's a difficult one in that you go, so let's say I wanted to increase the perception towards trust by 20%. How am I setting the leaders up for success to then be able to implement that to change the trust outcome or the job control outcome or the support outcome? Right? So I need to set my leaders up for success as a business so then they can do that. We can't just assume that the leaders have the skill, especially trust. I mean, if we think trust is a developable capacity, just like support, then why are we not training our leaders to do that?
Yeah.
And for me, it's a and again, you can't send leaders, and you may invest a lot of money in this to send them on a 3-day training course. They're not gonna, we're gonna get a lack of engagement. Nowadays, I think a full day training session is a difficult thing to sell, and I wouldn't recommend it. And 2, they're only gonna remember 5% of that.
Yeah.
And then how am I, once they go into the workforce, what component of that am I reinforcing as a behavioral piece, and how then am I reinforcing how well it went?
Yeah.
So this, in my opinion, if you're going to invest in leadership, do it properly.
Yeah. Don't
right?
just overload it with information.
No, I would look at a multimodal form of behavior, and then look at it from a maturity perspective. So find different avenues of engaging your leadership. So from e-learning can be one, workshops, coaching, mentoring, practical application, debriefing and feedback on that application in mentoring and coaching and creating that environment. And then I'd look at it from a maturity perspective. So if I wanted to create trust, I've got to think about what are the foundational skill my leader needs to create trust as an outcome. Well, I think they need emotional intelligence. And the first piece of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. If that leader doesn't have a level of self-awareness, then what's the point of doing any of the rest of the training?
Yeah.
If I sit there as a leader and go, I'm knocking this out of the park, I'm brilliant, right? I'm less likely to learn and fundamentally bring that information into how I conduct myself, the desired behavior I'm looking for, right? And then if we took psychological safety, right? So Aristotle's, Google's Project Aristotle, which fundamentally said if I want to create a successful team, psychological safety is a foundational element. Right? So if I want to create trust, I need to create an environment, actively create an environment where people can speak their mind without the fear of negative consequences. Those two are foundational. Maybe trust is at the end, but I need those two elements to then move to gaining feedback or coaching or mentoring or giving and receiving feedback. So then I can get to trust outcomes or strength-based leadership. So then I evolve my leaders over time, capturing all my different forms of leadership, both experienced, not experienced, young, old, doesn't matter. So I capture them all, and they all work together as part of a coaching and mentoring element to hopefully progress through that maturity model.
Okay, yeah, brilliant. What about those, so say an employee or a leader have their values misalign with or don't align with the company's values, and then can that be a bit of a stalemate for the cultural aspect?
It can be, but I mean, it's not like we're creating values of, be dishonest or So we always create positive values, and when we do create them, we normally create them very, very neutral, like compassion. I'm not going to sit there and go, well, I'm not a compassionate person, so therefore this is going to be problematic. And if I'm not, then the educational piece and the knowledge embedment becomes more important. So if I'm not a compassionate person, that's fine. Right? Not everyone is.
Yeah.
Well, how can my organization help me to apply compassion in a value for the organization? Yeah. And even then, it doesn't have to be me as an individual, but as a leader, can I help my team to be more compassionate in how they deal with clients, or how they deal with students, or how they deal with patients, or how they deal with that end result of why you've created compassion as a value in the first place.
Yeah, got you. What about as well though? So say middle management, team leaders, those sorts of people. Obviously, they're handed down what the perceived culture is, and they're expected then to deliver it. And obviously, previously you've said that the leaders are the ones that live and breathe and push it and all that sort of stuff. Do you ever see challenges in that respect for those middle managers or those less senior leaders?
Yeah, and that's a good question actually, because there's a couple of components to this. So one, you actively need to create a culture. So a naturally occurring culture, in my research and experience, is not normally a good. It's not that it's bad. It's just not normally creating a positive outcome. In that, you bring your values and beliefs, and I bring mine, and Tom brings his, and Sally brings his. So we've got this mishmash, and I may be disgruntled, or I've been there for 30 years, and or I bought my culture from my previous organization. So we have this mismatch of culture and beliefs and behaviors. So then I go, okay, great, go for it. Or I can actively try and create the culture that I want as a leader, right? And what does that look like with people? I'm not saying, with the strengths they bring to the table and their uniqueness and their culture and all these different elements. Research shows this is actually where you want people from different backgrounds to get the best outcomes because people have different opinions and different ways of looking at it. Yeah. Absolutely. So once I've got that, then how can I create the belief system that helps them progress, in a nice collective way towards an end goal, right? So whether it's compassion, as we use the example, how do I help my team bringing all those unique strengths and backgrounds, which is brilliant, in being a more compassionate group or compassionate organization to get those outcomes that I need, right? So that becomes a big piece of the puzzle. Yeah,
definitely. Wow. So what can workplaces do then to sort of minimize psychosocial risks, and how can these hazards influence the way well-being is approached from a workplace culture perspective?
It comes. So the two models that I mentioned is probably the key here. So one, the daily experiences that I'm creating, and then how am I reinforcing that as an organization? So, and I can look at this from a general perspective, and I can look at this from a risk-specific perspective as well, right? So I can go, let's say I want to reduce job demands, right? So I've created a gap analysis in job demands to know where it is, where is it happening? Is it seasonal? Is it up and down? If it is, where are those trends happening? Is it within a specific department? Is it within a specific role? That's just insight, right? That's the hazard identification in that risk assessment process. Yeah. I need that information to then make informed decisions on how do I show commitment and create a strategy around reducing job demands. And again, there's easier ones out there. Job demands I've chosen because it's particularly difficult.
Challenging yourself.
Challenging one to think about. And I get a lot of people go, oh, we can't do anything about job demands. We just need more FTE, right? Which, no, there is actually brilliant strategies out there for job demands and being able to make inroads into reducing that as a risk. Okay. But how do I show commitment? I could easily do that, as I mentioned before, going, you know what, I want to shift perception. I want a 20% more positive movement in job demands when I redo this assessment. And we think that's quite a simple one, but it's not, because if I want to see a 20% reduction in this risk, that then I need to think about what are the skills needed and the processes needed to, in fact, achieve that. Yep. That then informs my strategy in what I create. Yep. Right? So now I'll go, okay, well, we need to do workforce planning to be able to do that. We need to involve our people in that workforce planning. I need to follow through on that to make sure that what we've done has been implemented and those people know they're involved. I need to communicate and be transparent about that workforce planning. I might even create a measurable to say, I'm going to involve 2 different departments in my workforce planning to reduce silos and get better outcomes in job demands, or even how can I utilize existing resources while breaking down silos so then I can use those resources across departments, so then I can potentially reduce job demands. And then I'm going, that's just the strategy side of it and the measurable side of it to create commitment. Then how do I set leadership up for success in relation to job demands? And we found actually in our focus groups, leadership had one of the highest reasons why job demands was just a lack of strategy. Okay. Yeah, and another one was a lack of support. So even leaders feel they're not supported in creating the strategies to reduce specifically job demands as well.
So it sort of trickles down then.
Yeah. So then that leads me to the next point, which would be how am I engaging senior leadership in order to create the commitment around the strategy to reduce job demands and achieve those outcomes that I'm looking to achieve.
Okay, yeah. That makes sense.
The thing with job demand specific is, and as I said, people often think it's a difficult one, but you have to create the catalyst for it. Create a means of breaking down job demands and thinking about what are the strategies we could put in place. When I've done this as a facilitated, strategy session, there's hundreds of recommendations that wouldn't have existed if we didn't actually think about that as a risk and create the catalyst for the event to go, let's think about this and what are some ideas. None of those had to do with FTE.
Yeah.
That was just people coming up with little ideas, engaging them in these ideas,
Mm.
and going, okay, let's implement some of these, and think about what we can prioritize versus not, what we can do now versus later, etc., etc. Yeah, that's great.
Got you. So, if we were to look at this then in sort of from a sense that of creating a workplace culture. So, is it? I know it won't be as clear cut as this, and it'll be more nuanced. And obviously, it's not a linear process. There's a lot of different verticals. But do you see it as ever that a CEO creates a strategy, then the HR team is responsible then of building a culture around that strategy to be able to deliver those outputs?
Yep.
Or is it that I've consulted with my teams and my team said XYZ is their highest priority, so we'll create a culture around that.
Well, and that's why I'm trying to create models to think about this, because it's not as simple as CEO creates strategy, HR implements strategy, because that's how we do everything, and majority of the time that's not shifting the culture. But that's why I wanted to go, okay, so think about this from what experiences I'm creating for my people on a daily basis. If I think about that in how I design a strategy, then I'm going to design it in a different way.
Yeah.
So then I make sure that I potentially create the experiences that creates the beliefs or shifts the perception to get the behavior, to get the outcome or the result I'm looking for.
Yep.
And that's why I structure it the other way is, so once I've got the information I need, I'm not just simply creating a strategy for the sake of it. I'm creating the nuances in having the knowledge to make informed decisions to be able to create the commitment, the strategy, engage leadership, then creating the policies, the procedures, the training. See, that's part of the problem is we tend to go, okay, we have this problem. Let's train, let's create a policy, but they seldom shift culture. And that's why you got to go back and go, well, if I think about this from a gap analysis into a commitment and strategy and then a leadership, then a training session, well, how am I setting this up for success? And how am I fundamentally creating the experiences as after that training that creates the beliefs and the behaviors that I'm looking for.
Yeah. How's your energy? You feeling all good?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So I've only got a few more questions for you.
All right, go for it.
Yeah, definitely. So what are you seeing in the psychosocial risk space that organisations should be aware of, and how can they reframe their culture to ensure wellbeing is at the forefront?
Yeah, sorry, say that again.
So what are you seeing in the psychosocial risk space that organisations should be aware of? And then sort of conjoined to that is how can they reframe their culture to ensure wellbeing is at the forefront?
So
big one.
Yeah, we've measured it and identified priority risk.
Yeah.
I'd start there, right? So if we took the 14, what is my number one risk? What is my top 3? What is my top 5? But even then, knowing which one's a higher likelihood, which one's a higher severity.
How does an organisation, sorry, just to interject, how does an organisation go, okay, job demands is one that is impacting my team, or they might say, because I feel like things like, workplace bullying, workplace violence, things like that, there's people may come to you and say, I'm being bullied.
Yes.
So it's a bit more clear cut. Whereas if we look at things like job demands and things like that, where it's harder to sort of identify what is the catalyst for that?
Yeah, so we do it as a survey.
Okay.
All right. So I designed a survey that takes into account all the 14, is risk based, covers each single risk, looks at it from severity and likelihood perspective. So then I can essentially answer that question.
Got you.
Right? Now, there is free surveys out there, People at Work, CopSec, Barometer, all those different ones that you can use that'll somewhat get you there. And even if you do use them, or, you're a government agent, you're using People Matters, maybe just feel free to use it, go for it. I would then use that questionnaire and match it to the risks. And if it doesn't include a question of one of the 14, that you add it to that questionnaire.
Got you.
And insist that it gets added. So whether you add it yourself or whether you have the functionality to add questions, add it. Yeah. Because then I can then measure somewhat the 14. What I try to do in its design is create them equal,
Yeah.
right? So then I can prioritize them based on the same risk analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the other surveys don't do, they're asking prevalence in some question and perception in other, and that's a hard comparison to make. If that's what you've done, that's fine. Any information is going to help. But the important part is the nuances. So do I have the demographics? Have I broken that down by department, by role, by location? And what insight does that provide me? So then when I come to, controlling for the prioritizing these risks, I can think about it with some informed information. So while change management is number one in my analysis, followed by organizational justice and job demands, there may be a unique department that has violence as number one. And knowing the difference between that helps to then create a more informed strategy.
Yep.
And then once I have a more informed strategy, hopefully I can hit the cultural piece as well. Because if violence is number one for me, and you've identified that would have more meaning to my behavior, hopefully in reducing that risk. Yeah. So therefore the cultural piece might be a little bit easier because you've identified it, you've showed me that is key risk, and I go, yeah, I get it. So therefore, I'm hopefully engaged or motivated to participate or create the desired behavior that we're looking for.
Got you. And do you acquire that sort of that data, I guess, from, say, like you survey focus groups of employees?
Yeah. So for me, the survey one gives you a data point, and then the focus groups, which I strongly encourage, provides the root cause or the contributing factors. And for me, the benefit of the focus group is for implementation success. So if I wanted to, let's take change management, which is number one, just because number one. So if I wanted to make inroads into reducing change management as a risk or create positive outcomes for change management, why? How do I do that? So we found that communication and transparency was number one.
Yep.
So as I implement my change management strategy, I need to make sure I'm creating meaningful communication and meaningful transparency in how I design it. And as you can see, because I've asked that for the people in the focus groups, I can see greater success in reducing that risk and therefore more likely to affect the culture because I fundamentally know the most contributing factor to why that is the risk.
Got you.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant.
And even when we had that conversation around consultation, it may be, and I don't have any evidence to support this, but it may be that our general trying to improve engagement, maybe where we're losing the inroads, but consultation was number 2 or 3 in change management. So maybe it's that we can see greater improvements in engagement if we focus our engagement of what we've identified as the highest risk. So if I do change management and I involve people in the change management, that may have a greater meaning to the person, therefore shifting an engagement scale, let's say, or measurement, and improving the culture because I've identified that has the greatest meaning to you. So you go change management is number one, and it's the second highest means of why it's number one. So if I can engage you in change management, then maybe I can shift that needle.
And then would that be then like that trickle down approach? Like, okay, so you've addressed you've identified, I guess, what the problem is. You're then going to shift the culture to align with preventing or mitigating or addressing that identified issue, and then hopefully it equals,
hopefully see change. Even the act of a focus group is a form of engagement too, right? Because you're asking for people's opinion, but you want to bloody well make sure that you're doing something with the information. Yeah, because you can start to head in the red, right? And that continuum, if you're not showing that, thank you for your input, we value it, and therefore we have done this as a result of your input. Make that connection for people, so they go, yes, my opinion does matter. It does make a difference. That time that I spent out of my day to participate is worth it because it's shifted an outcome. And if that aligns with my values and my beliefs or attitudes, then I'm more likely to shift the culture because you've found a way to listen and involve me and then create a strategy based on listening. And I've got back to people to say, here's what we're doing as a result of that consultation process.
Yeah. So it's sort of just like less of the intentions, well, starting with the intention, but then actually following through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
brilliant, awesome. Thank you, Brett. That
No
was
worries.
so well put and awesome. I know it was a bit of a long one, so
Yeah.
I hope everyone found some insight. I'm sure they will. So yeah, that was awesome. Thank you, Brett. And if you ever need support, we're here for you anytime, anywhere. And if we're your workplace wellbeing provider, definitely head to our website and book an appointment. And Brett is always also on hand for anyone who may want to have a conversation about psychosocial risk, organisational change, culture, and stuff like that. And you don't actually have to be a part of Converge. You can, definitely get in touch with Brett. So how can people get in touch with you?
Yep, they can email me.
Yeah.
They can contact we can Google Converge, and actually psychosocial risk assessment. If they Google that as well, it'll come up. You can email me and we can put that on the
definitely. I'll put
on
it
the screen. Yeah,
I can. I'll put it in the episode description for anyone who wants to get in touch with Brett. Definitely. There's also LinkedIn. I think previously he had LinkedIn as well.
Yeah.
So definitely hop on our website. And then on our website inside the header you can see the psychosocial risk page, and there's a good form there where you can fill it out and get in touch with us that way as well. So thank you so much again, Brett. It's been an awesome episode, and we'll see you back again soon for episode 10 of Thrive, where wellbeing converges.
Thank you.